Imagine spending your entire life protecting the most important man who ever lived, feeding him, defending him, standing between him and death on more occasions than anyone can count, sheltering him in your home, raising him as your own son after his parents were gone. And then imagine that on the last day of your life, with your nephew sitting beside you, tears in his eyes, pleading with you to say one sentence, just one sentence, the most important sentence a human being can ever say, and you do not say it. What happens to a man like that? This is not a hypothetical. This is the real story of Abu Talib ibn Abd al-Muttalib, the uncle and guardian of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the man who gave everything to protect the message without ever becoming part of it. And today we are going to look at this story with honesty and with compassion, because it contains some of the most emotionally devastating and theologically important truths in all of Islam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wept for this man, and Allah answered him with a verdict. Bismillah Insignur Rahman Insignur Rahim. Let us begin. Abu Talib ibn Abd al-Muttalib was the full paternal uncle of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His father Abd al-Muttalib was the grandfather of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the same man who had dug the well of Zamzam and received the prophecy of a great son to come from his lineage. When the father of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abdullah, died before his birth, and when his mother Amina died when he was just 6 years old, and when his grandfather Abd al-Muttalib died when he was 8, it was Abu Talib who took the orphaned boy into his home, not out of obligation, out of genuine love. Abu Talib was a man of extraordinary character in many respects. He was the chief of the Banu Hashim clan of the Quraysh. He was known for his eloquence, his generosity, his dignity, and his courage. He was respected across Mecca and across Arabia, and he loved his nephew with a depth that the narrations make vivid and clear. Ibn Hisham and the scholars of Sirah document that Abu Talib never let the young Muhammad, peace be upon him, out of his sight during travels. He would call him to sleep beside him. He would take him on trading journeys because he could not bear to leave him behind. When a Christian monk named Bahira in the city of Basra looked at the young boy and told Abu Talib that this child carried the signs of prophethood and that Abu Talib should protect him from enemies, Abu Talib cut the journey short and took his nephew home immediately. This man raised the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and when prophethood came, when the revelation began at the cave of Hira, it was Abu Talib who stood as the first and most formidable wall of protection between the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the entire might of the Quraysh. The early years of the Dawah in Mecca were among the most dangerous periods in the history of Islam. The Quraysh had wealth, power, tribal authority, and social pressure all turned against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Abu Talib turned himself into a wall. When the chiefs of the Quraysh came to Abu Talib and demanded that he hand over his nephew or stop him from preaching, Abu Talib refused. When they offered him anything he wanted, wealth, the most beautiful women of Mecca, the leadership of all of Quraysh, if he would only give them the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abu Talib refused. Ibn Hisham narrates that at one point the Quraysh came to Abu Talib with Utbah ibn Rabi'a, a young man of remarkable appearance and status, and said, "Take this boy as your son and give us Muhammad." Abu Talib looked at Utbah and then looked at the chiefs of the Quraysh and said, "By God, you give me your son to feed and raise while I give you my son to kill." What a terrible exchange! And he sent them away. When the Quraysh boycotted Banu Hashim completely for 3 years, cutting off all trade, all food supply, all social interaction, forcing them into a valley outside Mecca called the Valley of Abu Talib. And this boycott was so severe that Ibn Sa'd narrates the people inside could sometimes hear the cries of the children from hunger. Abu Talib endured every single day of those 3 years. He never handed over the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not once. The scholars of Sirah record that Abu Talib would move the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to a different sleeping place every night, so that if an assassin came, they would find an empty bed. He personally organized the young men of Banu Hashim to surround the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a human shield during public gatherings. The year Abu Talib died is called the Year of Grief, Aam al-Hazan, by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself. Not because Abu Talib was a Muslim, but because with Abu Talib gone, the protection was gone, and the persecution intensified immediately. This man was the reason Islam survived its most vulnerable decade. Here is where the story becomes complex and important. Abu Talib knew the truth. This is not in question. The narrations are consistent and numerous that Abu Talib knew deeply that his nephew was a true prophet. Ibn Hisham records that Abu Talib composed poetry in praise of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and not general praise. Poetry that acknowledges the truth of the message. He wrote describing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as the one who calls to good and whose religion is true. He described him as the most honorable of all creation before Allah. Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, the son of Abu Talib, narrated that his father said openly on multiple occasions that he knew his nephew was a prophet of Allah. So the question is not whether Abu Talib believed in his heart. The evidence suggests he did. The question is why he never said it publicly. The scholars of Islam give us the dominant explanation based on the narrations. Abu Talib was held back by two things. First was the weight of tribal identity and the tradition of his ancestors. To publicly declare Islam would have meant abandoning the religion of Abd al-Muttalib, of the Quraysh, of his entire lineage. For a man of his generation and his position, this was not a small thing. It was identity itself. Second was the fear that his declaration of Islam would weaken his ability to protect the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because his protection came from his status within the Quraysh, and his status was tied to being one of them. Abu Talib may have believed that staying outside of Islam publicly was itself a form of service to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whether this calculation was right or wrong does not change what happened at the end. Pause here for just a moment. We are at the heart of this story, and I want to ask you something genuine. Abu Talib knew the truth. He believed in his heart. He sacrificed everything for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And yet, he died without saying the words. There are people in our lives today, perhaps in your own family, who know the truth of Islam, who have seen its beauty, who respect it, who might even believe parts of it in their hearts, but who have not said the words, who have not taken a step. I want you to write in the comments right now. Do you have someone in your life like this? A parent, a sibling, a friend, a spouse, someone who is close to Islam but has not crossed the line. Write yes or no. And if you want, tell me what stops them. Because the story of Abu Talib is not just history. It is happening in families everywhere right now. Write it in the comments. And let us continue. Because what happens at the deathbed of Abu Talib is the most important part of this story. Abu Talib became gravely ill toward the end of his life. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to sit beside him. And what happened in that room is narrated in both Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. From Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam leaned over his uncle and said, "O my uncle, say there is no God except Allah. Say just this one word, and I will argue on your behalf before Allah on the Day of Judgment." The chiefs of the Quraysh were also in the room, Abu Jahl and others. And they said to Abu Talib, "Are you going to abandon the religion of Abd al-Muttalib?" The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam kept repeating the invitation. Say there is no God except Allah. And Abu Talib kept going back and forth, looking at his nephew, looking at the chiefs, looking at his nephew. And then his last words came. He said, "I am on the religion of Abd al-Muttalib." And he died. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam stood up from his uncle's side and said, "I will ask forgiveness for you as long as I am not forbidden from doing so." And then Allah revealed the verse of Surah at Tawbah, verse 113. It is not for the Prophet and those who believe to ask forgiveness for the polytheists even if they were relatives, after it has become clear to them that they are the companions of the fire. The permission to seek forgiveness for Abu Talib was taken away. And then another verse came. Surah Al-Qasas, verse 56. Indeed, you do not guide whom you love, but Allah guides whom He wills. This verse was revealed specifically about Abu Talib, about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his grief. The scholars say that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wept for Abu Talib in a way that moved the companions. He loved this man. Abu Talib had been his father in every way except by blood relation and faith. And now there was a verdict. Now we come to the most mercy-revealing hadith in this entire story. It is narrated in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim from Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiyallahu anhu that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was mentioned. Abu Talib to him and was asked about him. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Perhaps my intercession will benefit him on the day of judgment, and he will be placed in a shallow part of the fire that reaches only to his ankles. But even that will cause his brain to boil." Think about this hadith carefully. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the one who has the highest station of intercession of all creation, the one who will intercede for people on the day of judgment in a way no other prophet can, used his intercession for his uncle. And what did it achieve? It achieved the lightest possible punishment of the fire, the very edges of Jahannam, the shallowest point. And yet even that shallow point causes the brain to boil from its heat. This hadith contains two truths that must sit together: the truth of divine justice and the truth of prophetic love. The truth of divine justice is this: dying without the declaration of faith, dying on the religion of polytheism, carries a consequence that even the intercession of the greatest of all prophets cannot fully remove. This is not cruelty. This is the consequence of a choice. Abu Talib chose, at the last moment when all of creation was watching, to remain on the religion of his ancestors. The truth of prophetic love is this: the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam loved his uncle so deeply that his intercession lifted Abu Talib from the deepest regions of the fire to its very edge. The difference between where Abu Talib would have been without intercession and where he ended up because of it is immeasurable. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah, the great scholar of hadith, commented on this narration at length in his work Fath al-Bari. He said it demonstrates that intercession is real, that it has limits set by Allah, and that those limits are themselves an expression of divine mercy in that they exist at all. This topic has been discussed by the scholars of Islam for centuries, and a few important clarifications must be made. The first clarification: the position of mainstream Sunni scholarship, based on the hadith of Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, is that Abu Talib died without the formal declaration of faith and is therefore in the fire. This is not a matter of scholarly debate among the mainstream. Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, Imam Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, and the vast majority of scholars throughout history have held this position. The second clarification: that some scholars in history took a minority position, suggesting that Abu Talib may have said the declaration in his final moments in a way that was not heard by those present. Ibn Kathir rahimahullah mentions this minority view in his tafsir, while himself holding the mainstream position. We mention it only for completeness, and because intellectual honesty requires acknowledging what scholars have discussed. The third clarification: Abu Talib is not to be confused with Abu Lahab. There is a profound difference. Abu Lahab was an active enemy who persecuted the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abu Talib was an active protector who gave everything for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that difference, that lifetime of love and sacrifice and protection, is acknowledged by Allah in the form of the lightest possible punishment. The fourth clarification: the hadith says Abu Talib receives the lightest punishment among the people of the fire. This means that among all those in the fire, no one has a lighter punishment than Abu Talib. And yet even that lightest punishment is described as causing the brain to boil. This should fill every single believer with both humility and urgency. The story of Abu Talib is one of the most emotionally complex in all of the Sirah, and it contains lessons that are not comfortable but are necessary. The first lesson: love for a prophet is not the same as following a prophet. Abu Talib loved the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam beyond almost any human being on earth at that time. And yet love was not what was required. Submission was. Declaration was. The act of saying the words was. We live in a world where many people will say they love the message of Islam. They respect it, they agree with much of it, but they will not submit to it. The story of Abu Talib says clearly, love without submission does not save you. The second lesson: dying on the religion of your ancestors is a choice. Abu Talib was not ignorant. He was not raised in a place where the message never reached. The message lived in his house. He heard the Quran. He knew its truth. His final words were not the words of an uninformed man. They were the words of a man who chose, consciously, at the last moment, to remain with the tradition of his fathers over the call of his nephew. This is the most devastating form of rejection because it is the most informed form. The third lesson: the mercy of Allah has limits that cannot be negotiated away by love alone. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the most beloved of all creation to Allah, and his love for Abu Talib was real and deep, and his intercession was granted, and it moved Abu Talib to the lightest possible punishment. And that lightest possible punishment still causes the brain to boil. If the love of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam could not negotiate complete mercy for someone who died without the declaration of faith, then nothing else can. The fourth lesson: the door is open until the very last breath. Abu Talib heard the invitation until the final moment of his life. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was repeating the words beside him. The door was open. It was open right up until Abu Talib chose to close it himself. The door is open for you right now. This moment, this breath. I want to speak to you directly now, not as a creator, not as a narrator, as a fellow human being who has just sat with one of the most heartbreaking stories in the history of prophethood. Abu Talib loved the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He gave him his home, his protection, his status, his years, his health, the last decades of his life, and he did not say the words. And I want to ask you something before you close this video. Is there a word you have not said yet? A declaration you have been delaying? A step toward Allah that you keep meaning to take, but something? Pride, family pressure, fear of what people will say, fear of what you might have to change keeps you from taking it. Because the story of Abu Talib is not ancient. It is happening right now in someone's chest as they watch this video. Say the words. Not tomorrow. Not after you have sorted out your life. Not when things are easier. Now. And if you already have said the words, if you are already a believer, then think of the Abu Talib in your life, the one you love who is close but has not crossed. Make dua for them tonight. Call them. Send them this video. Because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam never stopped inviting his uncle until the very last breath. Do not stop inviting the people you love. If this story moved you, if it stirred something in your chest, share this video. Not for the channel, because someone in your contacts needs to see this tonight. Someone who is close but not there yet. Someone who loves Islam from a distance. Someone who needs to understand that love without submission does not save you, and that the door is still open. Share it with them. Like this video so that Allah allows it to reach the one person who watches it. Here's the story of Abu Talib, and decides they will not wait until their deathbed to say the words. Subscribe to this channel, because we are going through the stories of this deen with complete honesty. The beautiful parts and the devastating parts. Because the truth is more powerful than comfort. Leave a comment right now. Tell me, what part of Abu Talib's story hit you the hardest? Was it the deathbed scene? Was it the hadith about the shallow fire? Was it the lesson about love without submission? Write it below. I read every single one. May Allah give everyone watching this the courage to say the words. May He open the hearts of those who are close but have not crossed. May He make us among those who hear the truth and do not wait. And may he be merciful to Abu Talib, in whatever way his mercy extends, because he loved Prophet, and that love was real. Ameen.